Bienvenidos a The Grateful Leader Podcast, donde hablamos de liderazgo, desarrollo de talento y cultura laboral para gente agradecida y con propósito, que quiere evolucionar el mundo laboral. Somos sus anfitriones, Gaby y Gerardo. Bienvenidos.
Welcome to the Grateful Leader Podcast, leadership, talent development, and workplace culture hacks for purposeful and grateful people who want to shift the workplace. We are your hosts, Gerardo and Gaby. Welcome.
Everyone to the Grateful Leader Podcast. I'm Gaby Piccott and I'm here with a special guest and our host, Gerardo Macias. So we're very excited to have you here in another episode. And today we have a very special guest. So please, Gerardo, tell us a little bit about our guest.
Of course, Gaby. Thank you so much. Welcome. Bienvenidos, everyone. Today we have Rod Zeeb. And let me, describe a little bit more about who he is, and then Gaby will start making some questions. He has an amazing professional, experience. So Rodney, or Rod Zeeb, is the founder and CEO of the Heritage Institute. Rod is a self-proclaimed recovering estate planning attorney, and he's passionate about training advisors to deliver what clients actually want, a plan that meets the financial needs of the family while preparing the family for the inevitable surprises that come with implementing an estate plan. Of course, Rod advises a lot of families, family offices, as Gaby and myself sometimes. So Rod is also an international speaker. He has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Christian Science Monitor, the Dow Jones News, Maclean's Magazine, Wealth Collection Magazine, and many other print and online publications. Also, Rod is the author of Beating the Midas Curse, now in its third edition, and Family Stewardship. And he's also the co-author of the novel, What Matters. So again, Rod, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Gerardo, for the introduction. And yes, we're very happy to have you here. Thank you, Rod, again. So we have some questions for you. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you as a person?
As a person, number one, at this point, I'm Papa Rod to my grandkids. I actually moved from Oregon to Ohio to be closer to my son and grandkids. And then my son and daughter are number, they're right there too. So father is probably the number one thing. And father and grandfather. And beyond that, I think it's really, as explained earlier, my passion is to help professionals in all sorts of different professions help their clients, number one, get what they want, and number two, prepare the next generation for what they're going to get, so it helps them and doesn't hurt them. And that's really the bottom line.
That's great. And I love the part that you involve like your family and then help other businesses. And yes, the value of family is everything. Can you tell us, how did you end up working in leadership?
In leadership, a lot of it came from as we started working with the next generations, as they were getting things. Leadership to them, and for a lot of them, was whatever mom and dad told them to do, they did. Okay, so there wasn't any really training in leadership. And we saw, particularly with business owners, when they passed, the next generation had never made decisions and they didn't know how to lead. And so it became really obvious that one of the first things we need to do is have that next generation experience leadership. And we call them pre-inheritance experiences. So they actually get an experience where they're in charge. If it goes good, they get benefits. If it doesn't go good, not so much, But the idea is if we can teach them leadership and hone their leadership skills, with a little bit in a controlled environment, it's likely to go much better when mom and dad pass on.
I think that's a great example. And like you describe it perfectly, when you're part of a family business, how can you practice leadership if you don't have the opportunity to make decisions? So I think that's great. And well, this podcast is all about being grateful and thankful in leadership. So as a leader, what are 3 things you are grateful for?
Wow, that's a good question. As a leader, I think number one, that my profession allows me to do it. I mean, it's not always that you have the freedom to really pursue your passion. So that's number one, that I can do what I want. Number 2 is that when you see what happens with that next generation as they start to lead and they start to understand that they're a leader, it's an amazing feeling to watch the blossom as they go from just kind of following along and doing whatever they're told to realizing that they really can make a difference, even if they're not the same personality as mom or dad. And I think that's a huge piece of this, because then number 3 is an extension of that. Number 3 is watching the kids take ownership of moving forward on their own. And being able to acknowledge that, I may be doing some things that are different, but that's okay. Or I may do it in a different style. Even though I'm doing the same things, I'm doing it with a different style, and that's okay. So I think, I don't know if that answered the question or not, but the things that really those are the things that really drive me is, can we really help that next generation to blossom and be the best person that they can be, as opposed to trying to, please mom and dad, or just not taking the step out there, not being willing to put themselves out there as a leader.
Yeah, that's great. And my last question before Gerardo continues. So you're talking about the next generations, and maybe some of them they feel desperate because they don't have the skills yet, or they can practice their leadership style. So how can you be grateful in those moments when you don't have like the power or the opportunity to make decisions or practice a different leadership style?
That's really tough. I mean, you hit it on the head. If you don't have the opportunity, how can you be grateful even for the things that you're getting that are positive things? And I think that's one of the reasons you see rebellion, you see drug addiction, you see lots of things like that, is because they don't have an outlet. And so rebellion is the next best option to go the other way. But yeah, I know I love the way you phrase that. It's really, really difficult to be grateful for everything you're getting if you have no control, or you have even if it's not control, no say, no input as to where it's going.
Yeah, I agree. And yes, maybe you can tell us more about tips, or how can they start introducing a new leadership style. So thanks, Gerardo.
Thank you. Yeah, I think those were really good insights, of how can you be grateful when you don't have control. I like that very much. But connecting to that a little bit, Rod, working with your clients, or maybe even with your own family or friends, how do you start developing that leadership in others? Maybe you have some examples for that.
Well, part of it, you start young. Okay, it's amazing how much they can learn young. And a lot of times philanthropy is a great way of doing that. So for example, when my oldest grandson was like 7 or 8 years old, he was playing t-ball. And my son sat him down and said, okay, so what can we do to help somebody practically? And JD said, well, there's a guy on my team that doesn't have a mitt. He doesn't have a glove. So every time he goes out the field, he's got to borrow one. He's got to do all that stuff. So they went down and they went to Kmart or somewhere and bought a real inexpensive baseball glove, and gave it to him. And the kid just blossomed. And so JD saw, with just a little thing like that, I can make a difference. And it was in his world, right? It's his friend in baseball. It's not, but by giving them opportunities in their world with things that are important to them, they start learning how to exercise those muscles of leadership and philanthropy, helping others.
Yeah. That's really great. Yeah. Because at the end, being a leader is serving others and
right.
Making little changes. I mean, immediate changes, which can be just as easy as what you just described, or maybe with your team or at school. So that's awesome. I like that perspective very much, and it ties a lot with having a purpose, which I mean, Gaby and myself talk a lot about that as well. Now. In your day-to-day, again, with clients or families, that maybe that they already have a mission. How is, expressing gratitude for them in their daily activities, with their teams or with the businesses that they have? I think that's also something important right now because of the world we're living in. So, how do you express gratitude? How do you transmit that to others?
How do I help them do that? I mean, how do people do it? Okay. I think number one is you need to understand them. You need to ask the questions and understand who they are and what they are looking for. It doesn't express gratitude if you give somebody something that's good for you, but not for them, or that, you would really like. It's gratitude when you can give them the things that they're looking for or the things that they would like to have. And so it starts with being curious and asking questions and not assuming that everybody's just like you. So when you can start with what kinds of things are important to you and what makes that tick and what would the values you, now it gives you ideas of what you can do for them. And too often we just assume everybody's just like us, and so, we give them something that we think would be really cool for us and it isn't for them. So.
Yeah. Good. Yes. Yeah. And it's all about making the right questions and also not assuming anything. I mean, I guess that's also the first thing you have to do when you meet a family, right? I mean, just like us, when we meet a new client, I mean, you really need to make that engagement and start creating trust. So yeah, definitely. Now, based on that experience, what do great leaders have in common? I mean, what's your opinion of that?
Okay, great leaders, number one, have vision. So they have a picture of where they want to go. The other thing I think great leaders have is great communication skills, because they're able to convey what their mission is or their vision is in a way that inspires others. Being a manager or being in a position of authority doesn't make you a leader. You've probably you've both been in situations where there's somebody who is, the title is the leader, but there's somebody else in the group that everybody's really following. And that's, and that's really what you're looking for. Is I think the great leaders are the ones that have a message and they can communicate it well and inspire others to follow them, not drive them or anything else. But so it's inspirational. I think those are two huge keys.
Yeah, totally. That's great. Gaby, I know that you have some things to say or ask.
Yes, I love everything you said about being curious and being intentional, inspiring people and having a message. Well, having the right message, right? And I have another question. What do caring leaders in your opinion, have in common?
What do what?
Caring.
Oh, caring leaders have in common?
Yeah.
Well, one, it's not about them. Okay, the caring leaders, it's about the people that they're working with. It isn't about them. If they don't get credit for it, that's fine. In fact, in some ways, it's better. So I think caring leaders have that attitude and just that perspective that their vision is to make others better and help others get to where they're going. So that's one. And I guess it goes back to asking the questions, but not just asking the questions, asking the follow-up question. Because a lot of times people will say something and you think that you know what they mean because you're putting it in your terms. But then if you ask a couple of follow-up questions and they really define it down, that's when people get inspired. Because sometimes people will give you the answer that's kind of the surface level answer. And if you ask a couple of follow-up questions, then they get down to what really is inspiring them. And that's the trigger then for them to follow. So it's part of it's curiosity, but part of it's curiosity in depth, right? It's what's the old phrase? Listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And so I think that's a big part of it. Is it isn't about me, it's about them. And then in order to do that, I really need to know who they are. I mean, what they really want. And now we're back to assumptions too, not assuming that I know anything.
Yeah. I love that part. And I think it's also very important when a leader is onboarding a new member, taking the time to know their people. And like expressing that curiosity and these follow-up questions. Let's say, for example, a performance review, and then you provide feedback or giving ongoing feedback, and you ask questions, but then you stop, and then you don't keep asking questions after a certain time. So I think that's a great skill to have. I love the answer. So how do you motivate like team members to be curious with other people?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because especially if they have like performance goals, things that they have to meet, it's hard to balance those two things. So I think more than anything, if you're the leader that's trying to motivate the people under you, understanding what it is that's getting in their way and what it is that's helping them to go there, and then putting them in a position that they can actually get there. Because sometimes what we as leaders say we want from somebody is not the same thing as how we're measuring them for success in things. And so connecting those two dots. And the other thing I think for motivation is being vulnerable yourself, asking that question about, have I ever failed to meet your expectations? Which shocks a lot of people. But if you show that you're willing and understand that you make mistakes too, and because a lot of times you'll fail to meet somebody's expectations in part because you didn't know what they were. So asking those questions about how am I doing, and what can I do to better help you, rather than just plowing forward, it builds rapport and respect, because now they know that they're respected. And a lot of times you hear things that you had no idea was a problem, because you thought it was going good. You thought you knew what they wanted, right?
Yeah. Talk about, work relations, but in your case, family relations, which are much more complicated, I think, especially. I mean, we've seen cases with more institutional families where, they make decisions based on studies and, actual skills from family members, etc. But it's difficult. Just imagine if your dad tells you, you know what, you're not suitable to be the CEO of any of our companies, or, stuff like that. So, yeah. At the end, it is quite complicated. That's why what you just mentioned, I believe is essential, just to ask and see what the expectations are for you and the rest of the family, right?
Right. Yeah. I love one of the definitions. I can't remember who made this quote, but one of the definitions of disappointment is the difference between your experience or your expectations and your experience, which means you can do a phenomenal job and still disappoint somebody if you don't know what their expectations are, or you have a different expectation. So, just getting that part out. So everybody's got agreed upon expectations. That sets trust, but it also avoids disappointment.
Yeah, totally. Now, I just have one more question. I know that Gaby has others, but I mean, you already mentioned a little bit about this, but what is the current skill gap in management? I mean, besides communication and all that, what other things do you think we're missing here with modern families and businesses?
Part of it is when you get to being in the leadership position and you're comfortable with what it is, it's really easy to lose that curiosity about what are we not doing? And, that whole thing about we've never done it that way before, becomes an issue. So having that inherent curiosity to look at, okay, we're doing good, but could we be doing better? Is there other things that we can be doing? I think that's a gap because we get so busy doing what we're doing and trying to lead. And we kind of forget to go back to the beginning and go, okay, is this really the best that we can do? I mean, it's good, but is it the best that we can do? Which again goes back to communication, because you've got to ask other people and you've got to do some other research into this to figure out if where you think you're going is actually where you're going. So I think, what's missing in a lot of people is they know the studies and they know the skill sets, but if you're not curious and really look for what's the unknown things out there, or they call it the unintended circumstance or unintended results of what you're doing, those things can get in the way. It can look really good on paper, but you're not getting where you need to be.
Right. Okay. Good.
Yeah. Curiosity is part of continuous improvement.
Right.
So I think that's a great example. And earlier you mentioned that, it's easier to assume that your employees or your team than asking questions and being vulnerable. Right. So what do you think? There are a lot of leaders that they don't give themselves the opportunity to show or to be vulnerable.
I would say fear and pride are the top two. I mean, we talk even with leaders, business owners who are now talking to their kids. One of the questions I'll ask is, has your business ever been in trouble? And pretty much every business has been in trouble somewhere along the line, right? And they don't want to talk about that because they don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to look like they've ever made any mistakes before. But those are the things you learned from, and those are the things the people under you are going to learn from. So I think pride is probably the number one thing that keeps us from being as open as we need to be. And people look at the, there's different kinds of value, and things that gain you and lose you and all that stuff. The intangibles are often as big of a decision maker as the tangibles. Time and money is one thing, but loss of control, loss of this image, things like that. Those are the things that hold people back and nobody sees it because it's all internal.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions for Rod, Gerardo?
Well, yes. Actually, I was just thinking about your possible experience with Latin American families versus U.S. families or European families. I mean, we've seen specific cases with family offices. I mean, in Mexico, the term family office is kind of new. I mean, it's been around for like 30 years only. But for example, in Spain, it's something quite common, in the US as well. So what have you seen in those terms, the difference between families with large businesses in other countries?
And part of this is just history, right? I mean, we had one of our members that was in the UK, that's out of London, and we were talking about family history, and he laughed at me and he said, "Your country has no history. My house is older than your country." And
well, maybe, but you do have history and culture.
Yeah, we do. But I think that's part of it is if you've had companies and organizations and things that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, there's a different culture than there is when you're starting from fresh. And I think family offices is a great example, because as you see family offices go from, well, basically started in Europe and then coming over here, and now more and more in both Canada and Mexico, they're kind of, I think, pretty much at the same spot in terms of how new they are and stuff. And what's interesting is, one, that gives them an opportunity to not be bound by what all the old rules were from the people who've been around for forever. So that's a great opportunity. It also, though, also means that you have to start from scratch, and you don't really have that history where you've seen people that it's one thing to read about it, but you've seen people that So that's really what I've seen is the difference is the people in anywhere across the world where this is fairly new, they want to learn from other people, which is the way we normally learn, but the circumstances are different. So they have to be ready to say, okay, that was great in those circumstances, but my circumstances are a little different. And how do I have to modify it to work for us? And think about if you're the first one in your generation, in your family who started a business, you have no history to look back on and go, well, that's how my grandfather or my great-grand, and so everything is new, which I think is both a plus and a minus. I think, there is you don't have something to fall back on and use as a guide. But the other thing is you don't have things that are restricting you either, because that's the way it's been done before.
All right. Good. Yeah, I really like that answer for sure. Well, Rod, thanks again for being here. Would you like to add something else for our audience? Again, where can they find you? The type of industries that you focus on, maybe?
Well, you can find us at theheritageinstitute.com, and you have to have the in there. Otherwise you get, I think it's a school up in Canada or something that, yeah, it's not us. So theheritageinstitute.com. And what was the second part of that question?
Well, maybe if you want to mention the industries that you focus on, or just families in general,
Yeah, it's just families in general. What's interesting is, I get to work with a lot of really, really affluent clients. And so people sometimes think that the kind of work that we do and preparing the next generation is limited to that. And when we wrote Beating the Midas Curse, the first edition back in 2005, they had me interview the client or look at all the clients that I had the year before, so they could see, how big a state and all this kind of stuff. The year before, I worked with clients ranging with total estate size of $250,000, which was a single mom who was a school teacher, to $2.5 billion. Most of our clients, no matter what profession we're in, is somewhere in that range, right? So these concepts aren't necessarily designed just for really wealthy family. The concepts of developing leadership is everybody, and listening is everybody. So I think that's one of the things to get out of the box is you can use this everybody and be helping them to identify what's important to you and how can you get there. And it really doesn't matter what the size of the estate is. It's, do you care about your family? Is really the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great question.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Rod.
Oh, thank you
for this conversation. I'm sure that this is going to resonate with our audience. With Gaby's network in Mexico and Canada, and mine in the US, and I think you can bring to the table great insights for families. So please, guys, follow Rod on LinkedIn. Also, check out their website. We're going to post the links as well.
Okay, good.
For your profile and your website. So cool. Thanks again, and muchas gracias, Gaby.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you to our special guest. Thanks, Rod, for all the insights. And I think all the advice that you gave us also applies to any type of company. And yes, so thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Yes. See you.
Take care.